Hello, I'm Milosz Rawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now in this episode, we dive into a story that has more twists and turns than a roller coaster. The recent purges in the Russian military. Yes, the country that brought us Dostoevsky's existential crises is now presenting a real-life drama that's equally baffling and also alarming. There is a not-so-quiet spring cleaning in Russia's Ministry of Defense and the armed forces, and we are here for it. Why is this happening? What does that entail? And does it spell good things for Ukraine? Let's take a look at our report to find out more.
There are emerging reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin has initiated a significant military purge. This action has led to the arrest of numerous high-ranking officials within the Russian military, with the Kremlin justifying the move as a necessary step to combat corruption. However, there is a widespread speculation that the motivations for this purge extend beyond the official narrative. The scale and style of the purge are reminiscent of tactics employed during the Soviet era, which has led to a sense of unease about the current state of affairs within Russia's military ranks. The question on everyone's mind is what exactly triggered President Putin to take such drastic measures at this point in time. The official reason given by the Kremlin is the need to eradicate corruption, but there are several underlying factors that may have contributed to this decision. The Russian military has been plagued by strategic weaknesses, which are a direct result of years of corruption and mismanagement. Even though the purge might remove some of the corrupt elements, the damage to the military structure and reputation is already significant. Another aspect to consider is the leadership style of President Putin, which typically involves surrounding himself with loyalists. This approach can lead to a yes-man syndrome, where critical feedback is suppressed and systemic issues are allowed to fester unchecked. Additionally, Russia's punitive coercion model, which sets impossibly high standards and punishes failure harshly, has created an environment where officials are incentivized to falsify data and hide problems rather than address them. This has perpetuated a cycle of corruption that undermines any attempts at genuine reform.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Picture this. It's the 23rd of April, and the Russian Ministry of Defense is quietly going about its day, likely filled with the usual mix of bureaucracy and inefficiency. And then, boom, the FSB arrests Timur Ivanov, the Deputy Defense Minister, on charges of corruption. A few weeks later, General Yuri Kuznetsov, head of personnel, is nabbed for possessing over $1 million in cash and valuables. The FSB's purge extends beyond just a few scapegoats. It's sweeping through the ranks like a Siberian blizzard. Last week, they targeted high-ranking officials directly involved in the war against Ukraine. General Ivan Popov, among others, found themselves in the crosshairs. Now, this isn't just a case of a few bad apples. No, this is an orchard-wide infestation. The Kremlin and military bloggers are buzzing with speculation that this is merely the first wave of a Stalin-style purge aimed at consolidating control and eliminating dissent within the ranks. So could it be the case? The parallels to the Red Army purges of 90 years ago are eerie, to say the least, though it's important to keep some historical perspective here. On the 23rd of May, the situation escalated to what can only be described as a Black Thursday for Russian generals. We'll spare you the names, because truly I doubt any of you care about them. But it's worth asking, what's the Kremlin's angle here? Officially, spokesperson Dmitry Peskov denies any organized campaign against defense officials, framing the arrests as a part of a broader anti-corruption effort. Yet analysts suggest a different story may actually be happening here. The crackdown seems timed to placate military bloggers and nationalists who have long criticized the Ministry of Defense and its handling of the invasion of Ukraine. By allowing them to criticize ousted officials, the Kremlin is likely aiming to bolster its standing among these influential voices. The purges appear to be a strategic move by Vladimir Putin, seeking to punish the military for past failures and ensure loyalty amid ongoing conflicts. And let's not forget the ever-watchful FSB, whose role has expanded significantly under Putin. The Department of Military Counterintelligence operates with a mandate reminiscent of the Soviet era, designed to maintain discipline and loyalty within the armed forces. Now, this level of control harkens back to the days of the Smierch, the World War II-era military counterintelligence agency known for its brutal efficiency. It is a chilling reminder of the internal surveillance and loyalty enforcement that characterized Soviet military operations back in the day. So where does this leave us? Well, the recent arrests and dismissals suggest a significant reshuffling within the Russian military, driven by a combination of internal power struggles, anti-corruption posturing, and the need to solidify control. As the FSB continues its campaign, the true extent and impact of these purges remains to be seen. And joining us now to shed more light on the issue is Dr. Małgorzata Bonikowska, President at the Center for International Relations and Professor at the University of Warsaw. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So let's begin briefly with what some people have been referring to as the purge in the Russian armed forces. How serious do you think it is, and is it likely that perhaps this could go even further than that?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's just a reshuffle and concentration on a new strategy concerning doing something spectacular, more spectacular at the battlefield, as the Russian army wants really to prevail. General strategy of the government and Putin himself is to continue the war. That's evident. And even after the reshuffle of the government, the changes of the positions of certain ministers just show, and the prime minister as well, that it's rather a continuation, nothing new. And all the elite decides to continue the war. That's the most important thing. And to do it, Putin will want definitely to get some successes more than it is now. So I don't think at that moment Russian government is interested in negotiating. It's rather interested in prevailing, in pushing Ukrainian army back towards Kiev, in showing the world that Russia is winning. And that's exactly what the Ukrainians want to avoid. And actually, Ukrainian strategy is exactly the opposite. They want also to do something spectacular in the battlefield, just to show the world that the Ukraine is winning, that Russia is not winning this war. So I think we are really in a very important moment of this war.
I mean, literally hours ago, we've had Ukrainian missiles once again attacking the Crimean Peninsula. So you're absolutely right. They really are aiming for this sort of audacious success. But now, the big question remains also, as for the narratives which are produced, especially by the Russians, sometimes they pretend to be willing to negotiate. Sometimes they say there is no point in negotiating. But more recently, Putin seems to be suggesting that Volodymyr Zelensky does not have the democratic legitimacy to remain the president of Ukraine. Now, it may sound weird in itself, because there comes Putin and starts playing a constitutional lawyer, saying about the specific provisions of Ukrainian constitution, as if he cared. But what does it mean, really? Could there be some more insidious plan behind this?
Well, I think it is just use of the opportunity given by the fact that the 20th of May, the term of the Ukrainian president finished. And of course, Ukraine cannot organize elections because of the state of war. So Putin's narrative is that Zelensky is no more president, that it doesn't have a mandate. Of course, this is done most likely just to confuse the international partners, and also to give the alternative, which might be prepared with Yanukovych as a different person. Don't forget, Russia never accepted Maidan and the results of Maidan. For Russia, since the very beginning, all the coup d'etat, this was called coup d'etat, actually, the fact that Yanukovych had to leave Ukraine in 2014. And this was also the moment where Putin started to be very aggressive. They took Crimea, and then after that, 2022 invasion on Ukraine. It is all consequence of the fact that Yanukovych is no more a president of Ukraine, because Yanukovych was a guy very useful for Russia. He was a president who was cooperating with Russia. So Putin,
a strongman leader like Lukashenko, right?
Well, in a way, I would say even weaker. Lukashenko tries to balance and tries to really keep Belarus in a way, out of even the war. And especially Lukashenko tries to keep Belarus independent. In case of Yanukovych, this was just a puppet of Russia, and he was following the Putin's orders, for example, not to sign the agreement with the European Union. That's how Maidan started. But now, after these years, and being, by the way, in Russia, Yanukovych could be useful again as a person who could be presented as a legal Ukrainian government in exile at the moment, as in confronting illegal now. In case of Putin, of course, that's Russian narrative.
So who's going to buy into this story, though, apart from the Russians themselves? Is it simply for domestic consumption?
Well, it is mostly for domestic consumption, but it's also a very strong message to the world that Russia doesn't acknowledge Zelensky as a legal president, and Russia doesn't acknowledge all the government in Ukraine as the entity to negotiate in the future. Because I think the preparation phase, the terrain, the ground for the future negotiations is built. The talks are happening all the time, the consultations. So Russians are quite active, and they are trying to prepare the ground for negotiations in the future once they decide to do it with somebody else than Zelensky. And they use just this legal excuse that the elections in Ukraine did not happen. But in the same time, let's not forget another thing, which I think the West should really stress very, very fairly. Putin's election were not fair. Everybody knows it. So the mandate of Vladimir Putin is exactly like Lukashenko. He is not really legally elected in the sense of democratic elections. The elections were not democratic. The elections were not fair. So the Russian oppositions in exile, people like Khodorkovsky, for example, they try to present this possibility to the West and convince the West not to acknowledge Putin as a legal president of Russia. The same like the West does not acknowledge Lukashenko as a legally elected president of Belarus, because both these elections were not fair. So Putin's status himself, he is not really a valid president. Let's put it this way.
That's a great point, isn't it?
Sorry?
Well, I am saying that's a great point. But one more thing, because you're mentioning the question of legitimacy. What matters more, though? Is it just a question of recognition or non-recognition, or is it the sanctions that follow? When we look at Afghanistan, hardly anyone recognizes them. Some people are doing business with them, but what really hurts the Taliban regime is that, they are not really able to participate in international trade and diplomacy the way they might have liked. So would you say that for the West, this could be the groundwork for more profound sanctions, even more profound than the ones that exist today, which would be based upon, predicated upon, if you will, the idea that Putin is not the legitimate leader of Russia?
Well, the West does not follow this narrative, despite the pretext which was offered by Russian opposition in exile, just because, to my reading, that Russia has to be a negotiation partner at the table one day. Sooner or later, the negotiations over the war will happen. And of course, somebody has to negotiate. So Russia is necessary to finish off the war. And who from Russia will negotiate? If we question the legal mandate of Putin, it will be very difficult to finalize the war. But we can use this argument if Russia starts to question the legality of Zelensky. So this is like a sword which has two sides. We need both, actually, Ukraine and Russia at the negotiations table one day. And if Russia starts to question Zelensky and starts to push somebody else, for example, like Yanukovych, definitely the argument of legality of president of Russia will be mentioned. But I stress, As of now, the West acknowledges Putin as a president of Russia. Even, the French government sent a person to participate in the new reopening of the fifth term of Putin. So as of now, the line is like that. Both sides have leaders, and these leaders, especially we look at Ukraine, once Ukraine thinks there is a moment to finish off the war and start negotiating, then we will take it into consideration as the West, as the part who supports Ukraine, but not when Russia wants to negotiate. I mean, all the time there are some negotiations efforts done. For example, in mid-June, there will be a conference in Switzerland where there will be no Russia, by the way, but there will be many, many countries, over 100 countries invited to think how to find a solution to this conflict, because we are generally interested in finish off this war one day, of course.
But we also want a just conclusion. Like, we don't want Ukraine to be forced into essentially surrender, into accepting territorial losses and all that. Which brings me to my final question. What do you expect is the most likely denouement in the current situation, the current state of affairs? Would you say that Ukraine still has a chance to drive back the invaders? Will it be compelled by its partners to sit down and negotiate? And what would be, the trade-off? Someone has coined the idea of, look, perhaps Ukraine could join NATO, but abandon its claims to the territories already lost. Would that be a good idea, though? I mean, for the Ukrainians, definitely not. And there are compelling arguments why we probably shouldn't follow this concept either. But what is your opinion?
It is a very complex set of issues. Of course, as far as NATO membership, until the war is in Ukraine, Ukraine cannot enter NATO because it will put NATO in a state of war against Russia. So NATO will not do that. But in the same time, NATO helps Ukraine in a very evident way, and the scale of this help may be larger. As of now, Ukraine survived very, very bad months when there were no American package. There was an American package pending in American Congress, but this was finally solved. So now Ukrainians, again, have chances really to push back the Russian army. The problem is that Ukrainian army is limited. They cannot really answer to the Russian attacks. Russian missiles every day just bombard the Ukrainian territory, but the sources of these attacks are on the territory of Russia. So the allies don't allow Ukrainian army to send back, to bombard to answer to that, to send missiles to the Russian territory, just exactly for the same thing, for the same reason. NATO doesn't want to become in a state of war with Russia. So these things have to be decided. Ukraine has chances to push back Russian army. However, it doesn't punch with the full speed and with the full possibility. In the same time, this gives Russia hope that Russia can win this war. At the moment, none of these two parts is winning. It's a kind of a pending situation, but the time will play in Russia's favor, unfortunately. So I think this year is really crucial to find some solution, or maybe to just give to Ukrainian army just much larger options. If this is given, Ukrainian army has chances to push Russian army out of the territory of Ukraine.
And that, I believe, is the excellent conclusion of our conversation, one that some Western leaders should really actually listen to and think, why don't we actually allow Ukraine to win this war? Why do they keep holding back if this is really not the way of actually beating back the Russians? And of course, the question of military tactics is another matter altogether, but we'll be coming back to that soon. For the time being, Dr. Małgorzata Bonikowska was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. So the Russian government has unveiled plans to impose higher taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations. This move comes as Russia's economy faces the repercussions of international sanctions and increased military expenditures, which have already surpassed more than $200 billion.
The proposed tax reforms set to be introduced in 2025 are expected to generate the equivalent of $29 billion annually. The Ministry of Finance announced that the corporate tax rate will increase from 20 to 25%, which is projected to contribute to extra $18 million to the state budget in 2025 and substantial $125 billion by 2030. For individual taxpayers, the new progressive income tax system will introduce several tax brackets, with rates ranging from 15 to 22% based on the annual income levels. The top rate will apply to earnings exceeding $560,000, affecting around 2 million people. Notably, soldiers and families with multiple children will be eligible for tax exemptions and refunds. The tax reform is part of a broader economic strategy as Russia adapts to the changing global landscape and seeks to maintain its military efforts in Ukraine.
The number of cyber attacks in the European Union has doubled this year, which many traced back to Russian-backed groups. These attacks are not only increasing in frequency, but also targeting critical election-related services ahead of the European Parliament elections.
European Union Agency for Cybersecurity reports that these attacks have geopolitical motives and have been steadily rising since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The surge in hacktivist attacks against European infrastructure is particularly significant, with threat actors aiming to cause widespread disruption. The timing of the cyber assaults is particularly sensitive as citizens from the EU's 27 member states prepare to vote for lawmakers in the European Parliament, an election that will also influence the composition of the European Commission. The increase in cyber threats has prompted national and multinational cybersecurity agencies to ramp up their activities and exercises globally. With elections also due in the United States, Britain and other countries, security agencies are on high alert for disruption campaigns funded by adversaries.
Hungary is set to lose its entitlement to the position of the European Union's Commissioner for Enlargement due to its close relations with Moscow and continuous obstruction regarding Ukraine. The country is expected to receive a less influential portfolio in the next European Commission.
Since 2019, Oliver Verhelyi, nominated by the Hungarian government, has held the position of EU Commissioner for Enlargement. However, some refer to his appointment as a peace offering to maintain Hungary's right-wing government aligned with Brussels. Considering Prime Minister Viktor Orban's stance in the context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, EU member states are reluctant to allow Budapest representative to continue in such a crucial role, according to several EU diplomats. Some voices suggest that EU member states aim to initiate accession talks with Ukraine even before Hungary assumes the presidency of the European Council on July 1st. There are concerns that Budapest might delay this process. While Hungary seeks a faster accession process for Balkan countries, Georgia and Moldova, it has criticized the start of negotiations with Ukraine. The swift accession of the latter country is not in the interest of Hungary or the EU, as emphasized by Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. In the meantime, please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.